Hello and welcome to this webinar on building a sustainable future. My name is Rachel Moselle and I'm the Associate Director at the Australian Graduate School of Entrepreneurship at Swinburne University of Technology. And we are very pleased to bring you this webinar in collaboration with our partners at the Institute of Managers and Leaders. But before we get started, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, who are the traditional custodians of the land on which Swinburne's Australian campuses are located, and to pay our respect to their elders past, present and emerging. We are honoured to recognise our connection to Wurundjeri country, to history, culture and spirituality through these locations, and strive to ensure that we operate in a manner that respects and honours the elders and ancestors of these lands. We also acknowledge and respect the traditional owners of lands across Australia, their elders, ancestors, cultures and heritage, and recognise the continuing sovereignties of all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander nations. And I think that is a perfect way to also frame today's discussion. So in this webinar, we aim to dig a little deeper into environmental, social, governance impact, and to explore how we can have a positive impact on sustainability from both an environmental and social perspective, but also as individuals and at an organisational level. And we have a very impressive panel to discuss these topics for you. So to introduce our panelists, I'd like to hand over to our event MC, Ashley Rennison from the Institute of Managers and Leaders. Over to you, Ashley.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Wonderful welcome from you, and welcome everyone who's watching our webinar. We're really excited to have you here as we discuss some really important topics this evening with a wonderful panel. I'm always really excited to host panel sessions, but I'm extra excited tonight because we have such a fantastic panel on board, and I'm really looking forward to them sharing their insights on sustainability, corporate governance, and looking at how we can create a better future. I'm just going to give a quick introduction to our four panelists, and then I'm going to actually throw to them to give a formal welcome and let you know a little bit more about themselves. So first up, we have Gail Hardy, who is a fellow of the Institute. She's Managing Director at Leading Change Australia and co-founder of Global Leadership Foundation. We also have Richard Evans, who is CEO at Talent Nation. Dr. Shamila Pereira, Senior Lecturer at Swinburne University. And finally, Sandra Caponi, co-founder at Good On You. I am going to throw to Gail to give a quick introduction first, and then we're going to launch into our questions. Thank you, Gail.
Thanks so much, Ashley. I too want to acknowledge the traditional owners, the Wurundjeri people, that is the country that I'm on tonight, and pay respects to elders past, present and emerging. And I am the co-founder of Global Leadership Foundation and Managing Director of Leading Change. As you said, both of those organisations, it's important and interesting to connect the two. When I set my first business up, it was alone. And I realised that there's nothing that I can do that's going to make a difference simply by myself. I certainly can make a small difference, but setting up Global Leadership Foundation was integral to the work that we do now, which is what we call raising the emotional health levels of the people on the planet. We do that through leaders, specifically with boards, executive teams and senior leadership teams, because we know, and I'm sure we'll come back to this, that without them leading by example, particularly in the whole context of sustainability, it's going to be pretty hard to make things happen. We can do things alone. However, what we can do together is so much more impactful. And we like to think that we can make a difference working at that level of leadership as well. That's me.
That's fantastic, Gail. Thank you. Richard, did you want to go next?
Sure. So I'm coming to you from Boonwurrung land. And yeah, look, it's great to be here on the panel. So I've known Gail for some time through the B Corp movement, and Sandra and I go back a long way, back from when she was a corporate high flyer as opposed to changing the world through Good On You. So I run a business called Talent Nation, which is a recruitment business focused on environment sustainability. We've been around for about 12 years. As my kids say, before sustainability was cool. So it was certainly very, very niche. But it was a business that I've always been very passionate about, that intersection of business and sustainability, and that the two don't need to be mutually exclusive. You can generate a positive social and environmental impact, but also have a business which is successful. And we're starting to see that intersection happen now at that corporate level. So we've been a B Corp since the start, so we're one of the first B Corps in Australia. We're Climate Active certified, so we're one of the first recruitment agencies to go through that process, 1% for the Planet member. So I guess we try and walk the talk through what we do, and certainly the team here are all very passionate about sustainability, but I guess the way that we look to create impact is by making sure the right people are in the roles that are creating the change. So I guess very much like Gail, you know, we can see our small role, but I guess really by trying to work more broadly within the sector, that's how we feel that we can create this change. So great to be here, and I did actually do the first carbon accounting course at Swinburne many years ago, when it was people were trying to work out what this whole carbon accounting piece was.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much, Richard. It's great to have you with us this evening. Shamila, would you like to go next?
Yeah, sure. I'm a senior lecturer from Swinburne Business School and teaching into marketing and research methods. But in addition to my usual business, I'm taking care of ESG matters as the ESG coordinator at the business school. And probably since day one in my academic career, sustainability, corporate social responsibility, and all sort of topics that could make us world better. Those things were in my radar. And so as the ESG coordinator, I also take care of what we have a signatory body, Principles for Responsible Management Education Community of Practice. So with lots of other like-minded people, we try to get the academia ready to get the next meet the next challenges. And what I'm really passionate about is carbon literacy training. I'm glad to hear that Richard had first ground from Swinburne as well. So we have come through a long way since then. Swinburne is the second university to launch carbon literacy in Victoria. And then we are pretty close. We have become a carbon literacy organization as well. So I'm leading that carbon literacy training across all the departments, faculty in the business school.
Oh, that is wonderful. It's great to have you on board. And I think universities play such a key role in not only educating, you know, our upcoming and emerging leaders, but also in supporting businesses in this space. So wonderful to have you with us this evening. And last but not least, Sandra, did you want to introduce yourself as well?
Thanks, Ashley. Hi, everyone. Also joining you today from Wurundjeri country in Melbourne. Thanks for throwing back to my corporate career, Richard. I did work for many years in the big bad world of banking, and I became, I guess, very interested in sustainability in big business and just how powerful businesses could be in creating positive environmental and social change, so long as we're moving money, capital in the right direction and towards the right things. And I guess that also sparked my interest in the role that we all have as individuals, as consumers, as purchasers of goods. And I really kind of connected with this conscious consumer movement of more and more people that wanted to put their money towards good things but not knowing how. And about 10 years ago, I had the fortune of meeting my co-founder, Gordon, who was working on this idea of Good on You, which was all about helping shoppers know the impact of their choices through a brand rating system. We together launched an app. It was 2015 when apps were the in thing. And we had something like 10,000 downloads in less than 10 days. So we knew we were onto something. We were really tapping into this sentiment of people wanting to do something but not knowing how, just looking for information on sustainability. Fast forward to today, we've now rated over 6,000 fashion brands for their sustainability, their impact on people, planet and animals. We've just expanded beyond fashion into the beauty category, and we're working more and more with retailers to be a ratings platform for all different types of brands that people choose to buy from. and more integrating our ratings wherever consumers are. So not just on our platform, but in other shopping platforms, other retailers online, e-commerce. We've got a cool partnership with Microsoft Bing. So yeah, really excited about, I guess, the reach and the impact we can have through these corporate partnerships.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Sandra. Such an interesting journey. And I think, you know, as consumers are becoming so much more conscious about what they're purchasing, I can see your organisation is going from strength to strength. I'm going to kick things off with a question. I might direct this to Gail in the first instance. This is one that's quite close to our hearts, given that we are the Institute of Managers and Leaders. But what role does leadership play in driving cultural changes towards sustainability within organisations? And do you have any success stories that you've seen where sustainable initiatives have led to really positive change within organisations?
Yes, I do. I have a great story, and it's very timely from a perspective of energy. So our work, as I said, is generally with senior leaders in organisations, and we have a particular opportunity to take leaders into remote environments for reflection, for development work, and also to better understand the different ways that people engage and lead. And we happen to have in two different programs the opportunity for the managing director of an organisation that makes barbecue fuel, and you will find it on the shelves in your local supermarket. And they were extracting carbon and extracting from briquettes down in Morwell, and really part of the energy sector, doing a lot of what now they would even say themselves as damage. And when we got to the Solomons, in both cases, both the managing director at the time and the other one who was chair of the board were overcome and struck by the amount of plastics and bottles and you name it. It's not an easy space to sit in terms of pollution and rubbish in waterways, in the ocean. And the whole conversation came about in terms of sustainability. Really interesting topic when you're sitting extracting carbon from briquettes. And as the conversation turned, there was a discussion around coconuts, because one of the things that you'll see in every Pacific island is a plethora of coconuts. And by the time the 7 days in the Solomons had finished, both the chair in his work and the managing director had come back with a completely different perspective on what it meant to be sustainable. They've now researched and investigating and have a whole process that's happening now to turn coconuts into barbecue fuel. They've reduced their carbon footprint. They've reduced the way they extract what they extract, and they're moving towards sustainable fuel. And I'm not going to say that it was just 7 days in the Solomons that did that, but one of the things we know is when you're confronted with something that's outside your first world problems, you start to really see things differently. And we know the concept of stewardship is really hard to hold if you're not with people who are experiencing the outcomes of what you do. So for us, while it isn't a cure-all, what we know is that when we're in a space of reflection, when we're in a space to see what else is possible and what is occurring in the way that the environment and the lack of effort that goes into sustaining an environment like the Solomons, and not because of their lack of wanting to, it changes perspective. And so for us, without leadership, without a change of perspective, without somebody saying this is not good enough, then it's very hard. And it can happen, but it's a much harder process when you don't have leaders in the play.
Yeah, that's such a fantastic example, Gail. And yeah, I'm never going to be able to look at barbecue fuel the same way ever again after hearing that story either. That's incredible. Shamila, you are educating a lot of leaders in this space. Do you have any insights to share around how the important role that they play in driving the cultural shift within organisations, or any success stories that you'd like to share?
Yeah, definitely. I'm so proud to share the story of carbon literacy at Swinburne Business School. And a bunch of us, 4 of us actually, volunteered to run carbon literacy training after receiving training from Carbon Literacy Project UK. And since 2021, we have been running this training, and we got close to 200 people carbon literate, representing academics, pro vice chancellors, students, student leaders, and everybody. And at the end of the training, they pledge to reduce carbon emissions at individual level as well as collective level. To date, as for our records, we got tons of pledges, the carbon reduction promises. And not only that, it's pretty much a bottom-up approach. So all the individuals, participants commit to initiate some more projects to around their workplaces, departments, and teams involving other people to reduce carbon emissions. So it's a very sort of fulfilling journey to see academics going on and developing curriculum based on that, initiating some more projects, and most importantly, talking about the leadership. Since day one, we had support from our dean, and in fact, they went on getting the carbon literacy certificate and ready to get this change done. As a result of that, Swinburne Business School has been accredited as a carbon literate organization, and now leading all the business schools in Australia to disseminating carbon literacy and involving deans and all the other business schools to get more sort of strategic actions on climate action, especially what we can do at the education space, and building that future leadership of our students, most importantly, through this bottom-up approach. So yeah, if anyone would like to know more about it, you can let me know, and I'm happy to share more information about it.
Oh, that's fantastic. What a fantastic story about how Swinburne's leadership were really early adopters in this space as well too. And, you know, I think it really talks about also the economic benefits that it can have for a business as well too, because it's clearly played dividends in terms of, you know, the interest that there is in this space now. Richard, did you want to share anything on this question?
Yeah, just I guess that the piece around leadership, and one thing we see these days within sustainability is the ambitions of an organisation quite often linked to the CEO and the leadership team. It reminds me of so Mirvac is a property company, so one of the larger property companies, did not have very good sustainability credentials, and certainly had a reputation for not having a great culture internally. So this is going back probably a decade now, and they were looking for a head of sustainability. I remember at the time thinking, I don't know who would take on that role, because it's a tough role. The organisation doesn't care. What I didn't know is that they had appointed a new CEO, a lady by the name of Susan Lloyd-Hurwitz, who came out from the UK, Australian, but came out from the UK, and she brought her sustainability manager with her. And they basically went through a complete shift, and they launched a strategy called This Changes Everything. And no one had done anything like that before. Mirvac, no one really cared about Mirvac and sustainability. They were laggards. There were a couple of organisations that were the leaders, but they came out and they said, we want to be net positive by 2025 or 2030. We don't know how we're going to do it, but this is what we want to do. We think we can get there. And so they put these big, bold ambitions in place, and the whole organisation mobilised behind them. And you look at the culture with them, they're like, people are really inspired, and people that will go and work there, they'll say, normally I've got to build a business case for sustainability. The problem is I'll go, I've got this idea, and Susan will go, great. When can you start? It's like, oh, okay. So, just that whole momentum. So they've completely shifted how they approach things, and it's really embedded within their organisation. And it's, from a sustainability perspective, people want to work for Mirvac. They love working there. They know that they're fully supportive. So that complete transformation has come from the top.
That's fantastic. Such a good example. Sandra, I'd be really keen to hear your examples of this from the beauty and textile industry, but I actually have another question that I was keen to ask you, if you don't mind. What are you seeing as the biggest challenges in both of those spaces at the moment in terms of sustainability practices?
Sadly, there's a lot. I think the way many businesses operate, but especially in these sectors, is inherently wasteful, is inherently not sustainable. I mean, there's a traditional model of producing something and then disposing of something, and not really valuing all the inputs and the resources and the people in supply chains, and just being focused on creating an end product and not being responsible for what happens after its use, its end of life. And that's served our economies really well for a period of time, but more and more we're realizing that there's lots of exploitation in the beginning of production, of supply chains, of value chains. There's lots of waste in the creation of goods and services, and then there's no one that's actually accountable for what we do with things once they're no longer useful. And yeah, if we start predicting into the future, I mean, we're already seeing the impacts of that today on greenhouse gas emissions and pollution in waterways, in biodiversity. Many people don't realise, but fashion is one of the most polluting industries in the world. It's responsible for, I think, around 10% global greenhouse gas emissions. There's very little sort of circularity in fashion supply chain. So most of the clothing that we all wear ends up in landfill. There's not many mechanisms for recycling. All of the blended materials can't be reused or put back into supply chains. And we might not all consider ourselves as fashionistas, but we are all consumers of clothes. So it is something that actually impacts all of us, even beauty. I mean, as a broader category, it's personal care products, again, things, hygiene products, things that we all use on a daily basis, or most of us do. And the production of these goods, and the traditional production of these goods, is inherently wasteful and causing a huge impact on the climate. We do know, however, that there are some types of businesses that are innovating, that are looking at ways we can switch that traditional linear model into a more circular one. And we know that more and more consumers are facing into these issues, caring about these issues, and voting with their wallet for the types of companies that they want to exist and the type of products that they want to support. And I think that is another way of demonstrating leadership. You don't necessarily need to be the most senior person in your organisation, but we're all showing up in clothes. We're all making purchasing decisions through our businesses, and it's just recognising that it's not just what we do in our day-to-day, but those choices that we're making that have so many downstream and upstream impacts that businesses are slowly starting to face into, and many of us can definitely, I guess, step up into the role we all play in that.
Such good insights there, Sandra. Thank you so much. Richard, I'm just going to throw back to you quickly on this. Within the companies that you're working with, are there any specific industries or sectors that you're seeing that are facing really unique challenges in achieving sustainability goals at the moment?
I mean, I think every industry has its own specific goals, challenges, and it's probably more the themes that we're seeing rather than specific industries. So I guess for the last couple of years, it's been very much climate and carbon, and Shamila's talked about the work that you've done around carbon literacy, and so that's obviously been a key focus. Prior to that, it was all around modern slavery, human rights, with the Modern Slavery Act coming into place. That's faded a bit over the last couple of years, so we'll probably start to see that come back in, and people looking at their supply chain. So there's and Sandra's already talked to the supply chain issues within the fashion industry. Biodiversity is obviously the next cab off the rank, in terms of looking at things like TCNFD. And then again, as Sandra mentioned, the circularity component, like we're still not there. So I think every industry has its own unique challenge. I think what we're seeing for the next 12 months will be smaller organisations getting caught up in mandatory disclosure, so that climate reporting, so starting to get their head around that. And then also from the finance sector as well, just the push from investors to have more information. And again, even platforms like Sandra, where providing that data and information, like there's this thirst for information at the moment and good quality data, and that's probably the thing that most organisations are struggling with, is like, how do they get their hands on the correct information so that when they're presenting a narrative externally, that it's accurate, they're not going to be accused of greenwashing. So yeah, like, I think rather than a specific industry, I think it's probably more broadly the themes that they're looking at. I was keen to kind of ask, I know it's out of sync, but ask Sandra around, because I always look at like education as a big piece, and I don't mean education as in the tertiary sector, but education of the broader community, because it's very often easy to think, well, we're in this bubble and everyone thinks like me and they're going to make sustainable decisions, and often it's the education piece that's missing, and I think platform like Good On You obviously does a great job of it's an easy resource for people to go to. Like, how do you see the role of kind of educating to I guess expand the reach, Sandra?
Yeah, I think education is so important in terms of making people more aware of the issues, but there is also a fatigue, among us that work in sustainability, and then those outside that are just already feeling overwhelmed with so many issues in the world and not feeling empowered to do anything about it. So it's sort of easier to push things aside, and that's why I think you actually touched on what maybe is more important, and that's information and making the right information available in an accessible, easy way that's not about making people feel more overwhelmed and guilty, but just giving them things that they are looking for. The same for businesses, having access to supply chain data to enable better decisions, better reporting to stakeholders is just as important as it is for consumers. And how good would it be if sustainability information was there whenever you were making a purchasing decision, but it's not. So instead we're saying, well, consumers need to be educated more on all the problems of the world, partly yes, but actually also serving that up in a way that can be actioned is, I think, even more powerful.
Ashley, I may need to add a little bit there following Sandra's point regarding education. When I first did the carbon literacy from Carbon Literacy Project UK, being a research in sustainability, I thought I knew it all. But when I did the training, I realized how much more to do. And most importantly, the decisions we make everyday basis, food, transport, and everyday things, simple things. That program showed me some simulations, calculations that how much I can reduce everyday basis. So that exactly we do in our carbon literacy training as well, demonstrating the power we have in our hand and showing that, well, we kind of take them in a journey, like we give them a shock in the first place, like something like how many earth you need to survive for next 5-10 years. And then give them the power with information, as in not necessarily all the complex information, but how much they can contribute in terms of reducing carbon emissions through everyday practices. And that empowerment activate people to go and do bigger things after that. That's beyond our training programs as well.
And Ashley, I'm going to add to this too.
Please.
So what's really fascinating here is that there's another whole side to this. And if we think about the Sustainability Development Goals, the UN goals, it assumed that by bringing them into action that things would change. And there's an amazing statement from one of the top climate scientists that's been working on this whole project, basically saying they thought with all of the data that everyone would have enough education that they would see what was needed and that sustainability would happen. He said the two biggest obstacles to the goals, it's nothing to do with climate and the environment. It has everything to do with greed and apathy. And so the inner development goals have been developed as a consequence of that to help people start to look at themselves. And so picking up on all of the things we've just shared, the practices to actually understand what the blocks are in us to making those changes and being more aware of what it is that we're doing and what we understand and how we live and how we lead. And I just think sometimes it's really easy to look at all of the systems and think, you know, we just need more education. But when you hear that apathy is one of the biggest obstacles, it's hard to say we're just giving people more education. So it's a really interesting and challenging space right now.
Absolutely, absolutely. And thank you all for sharing your insights on that. It was I think some really fantastic points raised. I want to pick up on something that Richard was saying before, particularly I think around, you know, smaller organisations that are looking to make a really big impact in this space. Gail, I might throw back to you on this. In your experience, how do organisations strike the balance between economic, environmental and social goals for sustainability? There's a lot that organisations have to be thinking about, whilst also just trying to keep afloat and manage staff as well too. So we'd be really keen to hear your insights from some of the leaders in the organisations that you've worked with in this space.
And I think I'll go back probably to Richard as well with this, because B Corp is probably the best example I can give. We're a no employee organisation, so we work with a whole group of people, but we employ no one, and that was intentional from the start. And so then to think, if we're a no-person organisation and we want to make a difference on the planet and we want to show people that somehow, and what we use our profit for goes into a philanthropic fund every year for the development of leaders in community. So how do we then balance our economic development, and how do we have policies when there's no employees? So it's been a really interesting journey, because you can get caught up in saying, oh, this has got nothing to do with me because we're making no impact. And yes, we are making an impact, and we're being measured on the impact we make. And so even a small organisation can make a big difference by exploring what impact we are having. And Sandra pointed out, we all wear clothes, we all buy food, and what difference can we make in doing that? So I don't think we want to get caught up in the bureaucracy of all of the issues that come with accreditation, but stop and reflect, and even just use the B impact assessment to see where you are and what you can do differently, because there's lots and lots of small businesses that are certified and doing amazing work. So we don't want to let our size get in the way of making a difference.
Richard, did you have anything to add to that?
Sure, yeah, and the B Corp, they're great people as well, aren't they, Gail?
They are.
They are, like, and it's inspiring the organisations that are actually in the community and the work that they're doing. I think that balance between economic, environmental, and social is something that sustainability was always seen as a cost. You know, it always used to be within an organisation, you go, right, okay, well, we're going to buy green power and that's going to cost us more. And so it was always a cost item in a business. And I think when the sustainability manager would come into it, it was always like, all right, okay, well, how much do you need? And there is still that stigma there that organisations do see it as a cost. And for some things, absolutely there is. But I guess if you can pivot it into value creation and look at, okay, well, yes, it's a cost. So you look at things like energy efficiency, and okay, we would talk in terms of payback and say, okay, it would take 7 years to pay back the cost of the panels, but it doesn't stop generating returns for you at that point, so that it is something that continues on. And Mike Cannon-Brooks has talked about that in terms of panels. It's like an investment that keeps on giving. But I think it's the lens that you look at it from, because if employees want to work for organisations that are socially responsible, they don't want to work for an organisation that's building a new coal mine. They don't want to work for fossil fuel companies that aren't considering a net zero pathway. They want to actually be able to talk to their friends and say, I work at this company. And so from an employee perspective, and actually maintaining staff and that motivation and productivity, like, you need to have that platform looked at. As Sandra said, from a customer perspective, like, people are voting with their wallets and buying ethical products. So there's a premium around that. From a construction perspective, they're trying to get to net zero in buildings, so green steel. And so all of a sudden, these things that there was a cost associated, they go, okay, we can generate more value from it. And if they're not looking at it now, it's going to impact them down the track. You look at the carbon offset market, and organisations are trying to build carbon businesses and invest in projects, long-term projects, because they know in 10 years' time they're going to need to buy offsets, and they can't afford it. So because it's the value of them that's going to increase. So it's that the ability to put environment and social issues into a commercial lens, that's where you see that real transformation happening, and that's why we're starting to see it get embedded in organisations and becoming a pillar. And the terminology of organisations moving from their mission, which is almost kind of militant in its approach, to their purpose, and okay, what are we actually here to do, and what does the workforce gather behind to get things happening.
Fantastic, Richard. Thank you. And Shamili, you'd probably be seeing this a lot in students that are entering the workforce that you're teaching, in terms of them really wanting to work for companies that do have that purpose.
Definitely, yes. I think many of our academics, my colleagues in the business school, we got that pushback from the students, like, okay, give us that insight, give us that sort of, we used to see sustainability and those topics as towards the end of the semester, tiny bit of module, but now obviously it has come to a mainstream. And again, at business school level, we have certain reports, legislations, requirements as well. So on that note, certainly we are meeting the students' requirements to be ready with that necessary knowledge to be employed by responsible organizations as well. Yeah.
Fantastic. That's great to hear. I think we're in very good hands with the students of the future, it sounds like. I just want to touch on technology, because it plays such an important role in this space. Sandra, I was wondering, do you have any examples of organisations that you're working with through your company that have been able to use technological advancements to really drive positive change within their organisations in these spaces?
Yeah, many. I mean, most of our partners that I touched on in the beginning also relate a lot to what Richard is talking about, that they're using our data and our technology to reach a certain target customer, and they're surfacing products or brands with sustainability attributes based on the data and the tech that we're providing them to promote better brands, and they're making money out of that. They're not working with us because there's a moral imperative, but a business goal, a business objective, and they're getting results. Some of our e-commerce partners in Europe are seeing higher average order values, higher customer loyalty, high sales for products that have a ethical tag or rated by Good On You tag. And so, yeah, I mean, that's all underpinned by tech allowing that stuff to happen more easily, more quickly. Tech is, I mean, can be defined really broadly. I think also many of the challenges that we were talking about earlier, everything from reporting through to what materials are being used and sourced, and how people are being treated fairly and empowered to be more productive. Often there's great tech solutions out there that big business, that academia, that or governments can maybe be more proactive in sourcing. We're seeing, you know, heaps of innovations in terms of more or lower impact materials that don't use toxic chemicals in their production, that are made to be able to be recycled, or can be made to order. So lots of innovations that, again, tech, maybe not traditional info tech, but different types of innovation tech are driving, and will be so critical to actually tackling these big challenges.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sandra. Did anyone else have any examples that they wanted to jump in with? Excellent. We might shift to a topic that Gail and I know we've been discussing this a little bit before the session as well too, but Gail was really wondering if you could share some insights with us into navigating the intricacies of corporate governance and promoting sustainability. Do you have any insights to share on that?
Probably the first one is to just remove the word corporate. It makes it sound as though the only people that are going to be governed in some way, shape or form are the public entities and corporations. So that's where corporate governance lives. But governance itself it's a broader concept that you can apply to any organisation. And it's all about the sets of relationships you have with management, with the board, with the stakeholders or shareholders and other groups of people around it. And I was reflecting on the voluntary nature, thinking about Richard mentioning, you know, we're going to be reporting now on what it is that we're doing around the whole climate adventure. And I'm already hearing organisations and rightly saying it's, you know, it's going to be expensive, it's too hard. What we're not talking about here is a reporting system. We're talking about working with the planet to actually make it more sustainable. And we forget that. It's like this sense that that governance moves us into this space of compliance of, oh, we've got to think about the relationships between here and here and here, or we've got to make sure we audit this, this and this, rather than actually looking at the big picture and the purpose behind what the mechanism is for. So for me, the dilemma around navigating governance, the intricacies of it at the moment is that people use it as a bit of a fallback problem rather than looking at it as a way of achieving an end result. And I'm really concerned about the way that we're introducing the sorts of compliance pieces at the moment, because as it was already said, people are just going to say, oh, here's another cost. Here's something more we've got to pay money for. We can't afford to do that. Oh, let's just, and it will be, instead, it'll be greenwashing again. It'll be another form of something because we're trying to work our way around it, rather than starting with the premise that this is going to make a difference to the planet. It seems like we forget that when we get into governance, we get into all of the nitty-gritty rather than the big picture.
Absolutely. Did anyone else have anything to add to that question?
I might a little bit, especially thinking about this shareholder stakeholder relationships. I think we need to think about the voiceless stakeholder nature. There should be something or someone to represent that voice. I can see certain companies out there, you know, giving that loud noise that it deserves and making that demand, which is really great. And in the education space as well, for ages, we have been talking about, for example, value chain model, adding value one step to another. It's time we talked about harm chain model. In each step, all the other damages we make through these production processes and so forth. In that sense, this governance practices, especially now that we have dramatic changes in accreditation, certifications, labeling, all other sorts of things are happening. So it's good to have transparent, responsible governance systems as well.
Right. I totally agree, Shamila. Totally.
Your comment before, Gail, it just reminded me of an old cartoon years ago where someone's at a climate change conference and standing up saying, well, what if climate change isn't real? Like, what if we're making the water cleaner and the air easier to breathe for no reason? So that's always kind of in that element. It's like, well, yes, we want to do the right thing, but I guess you're balancing that against your other kind with greed and apathy, and it's that there's always been this drive for more is better or bigger is better, and now you've got the degrowth agenda, which is a terrible name. If you're going to try and get corporate on board, they'll run a mile from that. But so I think there is always that balance, and you've always got that debate of like, whose responsibility is it? Is it us as consumers, as voters? Like, is it government? Is it business? And it's always everyone else, like someone else's responsibility. So I think there's a role for legislation to hold corporate to account, but I think you're right. I think it needs to be approached from the perspective of going, okay, it can't just be another cost or just a tick box exercise. It's like, well, how can we create change so that we don't have this headache, because this is just something that we do.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much, Richard. I'm really conscious of the time. This has gone so fast. So thank you all so much. It's been such an interesting conversation. I might end with a question to Sandra, and just get a bit of insight from you, I guess, in terms of what you think the next decade looks like in the textile and beauty industries in terms of sustainability. And yeah, hopefully, not to ask you to predict the future, but what do you think the next 10 years has in store?
We're going to hold you to this, Sandra.
Yeah.
It's more, I guess, what I have hopes for what it looks like. I mean, one good thing about corporate governance is that sustainability finally is the topic at the very top echelons of major corporations, and we're not just waiting around for regulation to emerge or education to occur, that it is seen as core to the running of a business to consider the social and environmental factors and impacts. I hope in the future that there is way more transparency on how businesses operate, and with that transparency comes accountability for sustainability practices and impacts, and empowering all the different stakeholders to act on that information, everyone from investors through to the end consumer, making choices that make things more sustainable.
Fantastic. That's a wonderful note to end on. I just wanted to say a massive thank you to the four of you for being a part of this evening's discussion. It has been fantastic. We've covered a lot of ground, but there's so many other questions that we could have asked, I think, as well too. And you've come at it with such a wealth of knowledge. And Richard, as you said before, you were all in this space before it was cool. And we really appreciate you all sharing your insights with us this evening. And I know I've learned a lot, and I know that the Swinburne students and the IML members that are listening to this will also have learned a lot as well too. Thank you to you all for joining us and listening to this conversation. And we hope to see you all at another event soon. Thank you so much.